If a group of people move to a country en masse and say, for the purposes of this discussion, it is to be understood that we wish to operate as a large collective in this country with rules that don't sit well with the existing legal status quo. But you know what? You can't do anything about it because this is our law. What you are dealing with de facto is colonisation.
Yes. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Good to be back. We haven't actually done an interview programme for quite some time. So I'm very pleased that my guest today is the barrister Anna Loutfi, who has just written a report on Sharia law for the Women's Policy Centre. Straight direct intro there, actually, Anna, simply because I think, our viewers are very, very interested in this topic. We have covered it many times before, but I still think there's an awful lot of mystery around it. And I mean, your report actually goes, from what I think it'd be fair to say that it's looking at actually just the rights of women and how they're being completely undermined by this court system. But it really goes into what actually Sharia means. When we say Sharia Councils, and we have something like 80, 85, I think, in the UK now. What do we mean? How does it operate? Where do they operate? What are they?
To that specific question, Peter, the answer is we don't know what they are, what they mean, where they are, who runs them, how they're to be accounted for. I mean, we keep hearing this number, this magic number of 85. Yes. Sometimes 84. It appears to have been 85 for the last 10 years.
Exactly. I'm glad you say that because, in fact, I was going to ask you that very thing. When we first ever discussed this, I think someone said 60 at one point, 85. It must be more than that, surely, by now.
I think it would help if we knew what we were counting.
Yes.
Because how many unicorns are there in the UK? I mean, if I stick some horns on some horses and count those, then obviously that gives me a quantifiable entity to work with. But what we're dealing is with something much more ephemeral when it comes to Sharia councils. I mean, what we have seen in the mainstream press in a number of reports, including a recent article by Julie Bindel, I believe, in The Sun, is that these are private affairs largely. So, the concept of the backroom Sharia council, the private room, the back room, private dwellings, people who've done extensive research into Sharia councils have commented on the fact that they're very easy to establish and to run because there's no formality around them. And there have been scholars and researchers who've suggested that perhaps we need a regulatory body that can provide some sort of oversight. And I would be in agreement insofar as the biggest problem with the concept of the Sharia Council is that there's no accountability within the country as a whole. But I'm very cautious about introducing any kind of framework that would allow the concept of the Sharia Council to become further entrenched in British life. And I think any such sort of mediatory body that was responsible for oversight would just become, another expansion of the Sharia system, which is an informal system. Now, the question of, what is it? What we know is that these informal arrangements that often take place in private dwellings and are unclear as to who runs them and how they obtain that kind of purchase or power within communities up and down the country. The question of what goes on in them is primarily regulation of marriage and family life. And so you have a system, an informal or de facto quasi-legal jurisdiction that operates up and down the country of Islamic marriage and family law, so that people are getting married as Muslims and getting divorced as Muslims. And this takes place, we keep talking about two-tier justice, but this takes place within a two-tier system whereby these marriages and divorces operate completely independently from any kind of civil regulation or civil arrangement covered by English law.
So actually, I was going to ask you, it's best to be absolutely clear about this. It has no standing in English law, Sharia law, as it stands.
This is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yes.
what we're actually confronting when we ask the question of what is Sharia is really what is English law. Yeah. Because when you say it has no standing, if something occurs in England and it's nominally considered to be unlawful, or it's nominally considered even to be criminal, which might be the case when we're talking about something like female genital mutilation or honour killing, but it's not prosecuted, or there is a hands-off approach to prosecuting it, or there is this sort of live and let live approach or turn a blind eye approach, which we are seeing with respect to numerous kinds of practices that are either tacitly tolerated within English law or expressly forbidden under English law. And yet these practices not only go on, but they are growing exponentially with the growth of certain enclaves within the country that are ethno-religiously, culturally identified within the enclave with one another, that see themselves as operating to different rules than that of the nation state or the body politic as a whole, and are very loyal to those rules and are very keen to demarcate the boundaries of the clan enclave, as I call it, from the rest of the population, the majority population, or the general body politic. For me, this isn't just about women's equality. I was commissioned to write this report for the Women's Policy Centre, primarily to expose what is already very well established and known, that under systems that nominally go by, the term Islamic or Sharia jurisdictions, women are, without controversy, not equal to men. And that is a problem. It is a problem because the British state recognises formal equality of all before the law. So if you have systems that are allowed to operate and even encouraged to operate that do not recognise formal equality as part of their legal infrastructure, then the British state has been undermined and the British jurisdiction has been undermined, and we see the emergence of quasi or parallel legal jurisdictions. But even if you don't give a toss about women, and there are plenty who don't, you may give a toss about British sovereignty. You may give a toss about the coherence and the resources of the British legal system to enforce its own jurisdiction across the population in a uniform and broadly egalitarian way. And what the growth of clan enclaves that see themselves as led by Islamic teachers and rulers and authorities who hold sway over large numbers of people in cities up and down the country is the breaking down of the fabric, the legal fabric that allows us to speak of the jurisdiction of England and Wales, or allows us to speak of the United Kingdom as a legal jurisdiction.
Hello, please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you. When it comes to individual cases, if you could just paint or some examples, if you could give, of the experience of, say, a woman in a Sharia court, if the husband wants to get divorced, is this true where he can just simply say, I divorce you 3 times? He has to say, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you.
Yeah, it's known as the talaq, and it is a word in Arabic which means repudiation. And it is generally considered within the Islamic legislature that operates across the Arab world and many Muslim states. And if you go to the Quranic teachings of many Islamic scholars and across the Sunni Shia divide, there is recognition of the talaq as a unilateral system of repudiation.
But it is part of Sharia, is it, or not?
It is a Quranic principle, yes, that the husband can repudiate his wife. And that is a condition, in a sense, of her obedience, that if she is not behaving in a way that is considered to be proper, then divorce is something that can be held over her. It's also a way, because the husband has the right to withhold a divorce or to initiate a divorce unilaterally. Not always. And there are systems within Islamic systems that allow for women to be given, in special dispensations, the right of repudiation within a contractual arrangement. But broadly speaking, it is a unilateral property of the husband to divorce his wife through utterance, and that could be a deferred condition, such as if you do this, then you will be divorced. It can also be used to extort financial resources from a woman, that I will not divorce you unless you, right. And then you see, for example, some sort of financial transaction being held over a woman's head. Now, this goes completely against what I just referred to as formal equality in English family law, if you have women who are coming into the country or living in the country who are married according to Islamic laws and divorcing according to Islamic laws with no oversight at all by the English law, the jurisdiction of England and Wales, the legislation and the common law, if you don't have any oversight there, then basically what you're looking at are women who are, I would say, I've heard phrases such as fallen between the cracks. That's Emma Webb, now Trimble, in her report, excellent report for Civitas in 2020. She used the title of falling through the cracks, because these women are basically living in what I refer to in my report as transnational hellholes. It's not clear where their protections lie. And if we look at certain communities in Britain where there are women who are not employed, they are not integrated, they're not encouraged to integrate, they don't speak English, they may have very poor education, they may even be illiterate, even in their own culture, let alone in English culture, then they're not going to be in a position to navigate this complex legal framework. And very often, the imam within their community will have a larger than life status for such women and for their husbands. One of the things I say in the report is that we have a cult of imamism emerging in Britain. Now, that's not something you're going to find if you read the Quran. You're not going to see any references to the cult of imamism. And if you go to Arab and Muslim states across the world, you won't necessarily find that concept clearly defined. But you can see it in Britain, where the role of a particular charismatic teacher or scholar who is also maybe a political operator and maybe has also, all kinds of private lucrative interests that tie him up with specific businesses, much like the sort of Sicilian mafia, then certain individuals, always male, will hold sway over hundreds of thousands of people who will do what that person wants. In that sense, it is very confusing and misleading to speak about Sharia law single, because even as an Islamic scholar, you would never say there is a Sharia law single. I mean, you could argue that the Quran teaches that there is a divine way to be and that the word Sharia is actually just following God's law. But when you look at the legislation across the world that is nominally Sharia, it's very, different. What I think is more helpful for people in this country is to say not what is Sharia law, not what the Quran says, not what all the theological and scholarly debates are about different aspects of Sharia, because you just get lost in translation indefinitely. What makes sense for us here in Britain is to say, what are the practices that we see certain cultural enclaves engaging in? Do we have a problem with those practices? If so, why do we have a problem? I'll give you an example. Cousin marriage. All right. That's not something that is, codified in the Quran. Okay. But it is practiced by many, many, many people living within Muslim enclaves in Britain. And there's been articles about it recently because of the NHS saying, well, it's a very good way of developing and strengthening family ties. But the NHS is correct, because that is precisely why people who live in cultural enclaves practice it, because it's a way of strengthening the clan. And because it's such an effective tactic, I say in the report, don't for 1 minute think that cousin marriage is just a sort of passive practice that's inherited from one generation to the next, practiced by ignorant people who have no idea about the medical risks. That is not the case. It is a conscious tactic that is deployed in order to strengthen communities who see themselves fundamentally as different and differentiatable from the majority population. And to hell with the medical consequences.
Although, actually, it seemed to me that the NHS saying that was sort of justifying it. They weren't just describing it. Isn't that right? I mean, the reason I ask is that is it's a very important, I think, point is that if you have, say, NHS putting forward the benefits of first cousin marriage, when it comes to your own profession, the legal profession, what is their attitude to the encroachments and the position of Sharia councils in Britain? What are they up in arms about it? It doesn't appear to be the case that they would be. I mean, how much have they changed? I know you're not going to speak for the whole bar, as it were, but I would be interested to know, is your concern about Sharia, is that typical or not typical of the law, the profession?
Well, I can't speak for... I suppose it depends which area of law you work in. I mean, I don't have much contact with families and questions of family jurisdiction because I work mainly in employment and human rights law, so I do have a kind of grasp of the human rights situation. But if you work, for example, in family law, if you work in immigration law, I'm sure you have stories to tell. And I have to say, it's not something that I've seen the bar as a profession particularly interested in workshopping, but that's in fairness to the bar. The bar is just one institutional context in Britain. If you look at institutional context across the board, whether it's education and schooling, or whether it's policing, or whether it's social work, you can see that there is generally an unwillingness to talk about the problem that we're calling Sharia very generically. What tends to happen, and I try to chart this in the report, is some individual, some hapless individual, usually a Conservative MP, right, naming their names, will pick up on something that's been brought to their attention by a constituent, and they'll try to raise it in Parliament. Cousin marriage has been raised numerous times as a practice that is, it's a health risk, but because it's also mandated within clan structures, it can be imposed on people as part of forced marriage campaigns and child marriage, child betrothals. Cousin marriage is not just a medical issue. It's also an issue that touches on the question of whether people can consent and what sorts of practices are taking place under the rubric of Islamic law that are actually infringements of the right to refuse to enter into a marriage, or underage marriages. And, these are issues that are tangential, but very much connected to cousin marriage. Fundamentally, what we have to see is that cousin marriage, taking as an example, one example of a practice that has come to the public's attention, is an efficient and an effective way for clans to entrench their power and their control of resources, to expand their bases from family networks, and to mark the boundaries between the enclave and the host state and its population. And if we see that in cousin marriage, we can see that in all manner of other practices. We can see it in female genital mutilation and any modesty code that says that women should be chaste, that women should be modest, dress codes, circumcision. These are linked to the idea that women are clan property. Women are always clan property. Go to any part of the world where you don't have stable and certainly not democratic states that have, a uniform legal infrastructure that is coherent and uniformly applied. What you have is the outbreak of clans who compete with one another for control of resources and territory. And this is often described in the literature as balkanization, obviously because of the experience that we saw in the former Yugoslavia. Now, what I'm saying is Balkanisation is not something that should be seen as confined solely to the so-called third world, backward cultures, places far away from here that are less enlightened. We have clans operating territorially and jurisdictionally in this country. They are growing, and they are growing in number and strength and political influence. And they seem to be less willing over time to adopt practices geared towards integration and uniformity and homogeneity, and more towards differentiation, clan withdrawal, enclave boundary marking, territorialization, and two-tier forms of justice. And the woman question, which Sharia draws our attention to, and which many feminists would be nominally interested in Sharia because it's a feminist question of whether women have equality de facto or de jure in Britain today, is also a question, as I put it in my report, of British sovereignty and legal stability. And if we don't want to see a balkanisation of Britain, then we must address powerful clan structures in our country, and we have to ask the questions that I ask about the imams in my report, which is, who are they?
Yes. Exactly.
By what authority do they have the status within their communities that they have? What kind of political influence do they have or seek to have? Are they in any way operatives for political agendas, including agendas that might be questions of national security? We've all heard of Anjem Choudary.
Yes.
Well, it seems to me, looking at his rather sordid career, that in addition to being a sort of internationally known terrorist, an advocate for Sharia law, as he sees Sharia law, he was also somebody that was constantly sort of advising women on their divorce options. How did a man like that nominally get to be both an international terrorist operator that was sought by multiple jurisdictions and is now in prison? How did he also get to be having a kind of, friendly drop-in legal clinic for women that, were sent to him?
Is it because there is a complete and utter lack of challenge? I mean, from outside and from within? There's someone out sheer strength of, or the big guy with the loudest voice. But I mean, there is no, it seems to me, and there's no pushback on this. We all see that there is a problem.
Yeah.
Your report is vital. Emma's report, Emma Trimble, she's very connected with the NCF, and she, in fact, interviewed her about that report. Things haven't really moved on since between that and your one.
It's a curious thing because it seems like every 10 years there's a sort of little flutter of noise about Sharia, and then the flutter dies down. And then we come back 10 years later and it seems like the statistics haven't really changed. We're still dealing with the same percentage of practicing Muslims in the country. We're still dealing with the same 85 magical figure of that many Sharia courts, even though we know that they are not countable because they're operating in private jurisdictions and they're not registered and they're not given any oversight. But we still come back to it and we say, we should. And one MP here, Fiona Bruce, tried to introduce some very modest legal amendments to stop women from Muslim communities being pressurised to abort fetuses that were female infanticide.
That's another thing you mentioned in your report.
Yeah.
This is kind of self-selecting abortion.
Self-selective abortion, which should be criminal because it completely contradicts the principle of formal equality before the law. We know anecdotally, and again through private medical clinics and even in sort of public hospitals, that it is a thing because within the clan, women are property of the clan. And the culture itself operates on the basis of something called son preference. So if you've had a daughter and you get pregnant with another girl, you might be under pressure. And this is something that women from Muslim communities have openly, admitted to, that there is pressure on them to abort. So you've got that practice. Again, it's about developing the clan stronghold. Cousin marriage is another one. Female genital mutilation. There are no prosecutions. Why not? People keep asking questions about it. Then you have the divorce issues and marriage issues for women under, basically under an quasi-legal Islamic jurisdiction whose marriages and their divorces are not even recognised. under the English jurisdiction. You have men taking more than one wife. You have women and children being taken to Pakistan to be basically married off. All of these issues seem to come round again and again and again. One MP will put their foot down, or they'll put their head above the parapet and say, we need a bit of legislation tweaking here. We've got to stop using arbitration clauses to allow Sharia councils to basically operate an independent legal system. And again and again and again, there is this wall of silence. Or if anybody does bother to address the issue, they'll say, well, what about religious freedom?
Yes.
Now, I just want to say something about religious freedom, if I may, because I think it's really important.
I've had someone say that to me very recently, actually. The religious freedom.
The religious freedom. Yeah. So this is something that I know we're all very interested in the European Convention on Human Rights, and whether we should be in it or not. But what I would say about generally convention rights, which are the foundations of our Domestic Human Rights Act and our human rights legal apparatus, is that there are very few human rights that are recognised in domestic law that are not qualified. And people forget this. And I think they forget this because we live in a legal culture which is now politicised to the extent that everything's about rights, nothing about the social contract, nothing about obligations. But if you look at human rights as actually properly embedded in a social contract, you don't have an unqualified right to anything pretty much except the right to life. Yeah. Okay, and even that's qualified, as we've seen, when it comes to female fetuses. But moving on from that issue, when it comes to religious freedom, Article 9 of the European Convention makes quite clear, as it does in other articles, that you have the right to religious freedom, but not if it means breaking the law of the land, and if it's going to undermine the very democratic nature of the society. So it's a very simple response. If someone says, well, what about religious freedom? It's like, well, what are we talking about when we speak about Sharia law? Does it offend the principle of formal equality between the sexes? Yeah. Okay. Well, there's no right there. There's no right to introduce de facto or de jure a system of formal legal inequality between the sexes. Is there a right to religious freedom such that the entire legal jurisdiction of England and Wales is called into question, rendering it balkanised, unstable and susceptible to violent conflict? No, there's no such right.
Do you see that? Because this is a topic that's coming up more and more. Do you see that as a possibility that if we become that balkanised, that there will be some kind of social upheaval, violence?
I think we've seen violence already. We just haven't called it out for what it is. And, you know, the obvious example are the so-called grooming gangs. A more violent example of clan operations designed to establish territorial jurisdiction over the population, using the bodies of women and girls as concubines, sexual slaves, nominally sexual brides, whatever language you want to put upon it, that is clearly a violence, and an extraordinary violence. And we have simply treated it as the sort of criminal behaviour of a few miscreants, and therefore we haven't had to look at it in terms of a kind of intimation of what lies ahead, which is, if we allow this kind of violence to go unpunished and undealt with, then it can only escalate into full-scale balkanisation and civil war between clans, where women are the prize and the property and the punishment. And I think we've seen it already. It's already endemic in our country, but it's going to get worse. Yes, for sure. I do think that's a huge problem, and it seems to me bizarre that people are able to apply a way of thinking to their country that they would never apply to their own house.
Yes.
You don't just live in a house and say, people can just do what they like in my house. And more and more people can come into my house and do more and more things that I don't like or I'm not unsure of. And I'm going to leave the windows and the doors open, and I'm going to try to provide through my hard work enough funds so that everybody in my house who's chosen to live here can just do whatever they want, even if it means, burning and scolding a young girl because she hasn't given satisfaction sexually, or branding a young girl on the buttocks with the letter M for Muhammad, or killing a 17-year-old because she wears too much makeup and is considered to be a bit of a liability in terms of the family honour. You don't just sit there and say, well, it can go on in my house and I'll fund it and I'll never say anything. As more and more and more people move into your house and continue to do that, and the behaviour gets more and more out of control and more violent. You just don't do that. No one in their right mind would think that couldn't end in anything but a terrible outcome for everybody concerned.
Yeah.
The whole point of houses is that they bring succour and shelter to the individuals who live within them. Therefore, they are locked, they are walled, there are rules, and people who live in those houses are subject to those rules. And if they're not, then they can be evicted or thrown out by the owners of the house. We have to start thinking like that and move away from this ludicrous idea that we can't talk about it. We can't talk about it because of race. Yeah. Or if it's about religion, it's about a race that is a religion, or a religion that is a race. We can't talk about religion or race. We can't talk. Why not? Why not if there are children being harmed?
Yes. Yeah.
It seems to me almost a self-indulgent, narcissistic fantasy that we can live without ever having to take any responsibility for the conditions of our home, and leave that sort of absolute show for the subsequent generations.
I would say also that the narcissism exists within, basically the outlook which, above all else, my ideological outlook has got to remain intact. That's what they're sort of saying. And essentially, I will therefore deny or undermine anything which is in some way shakes that worldview. That world would be the one that you actually just described about the house, really.
Yeah.
That's what I see it as, is sort of amongst very clever people, professional people, middle-class people, well-off people, whatever, this kind of, there's a reluctance, but also just more than a reluctance, a kind of anger, actually, at certain things being brought up, In your report, back to Sharia law, although we didn't go that far from it, strong recommendations at the end. One that caught my eye was just simply that we should disband Sharia Councils.
Yeah.
But you seem to have shown at the beginning why that might be a very difficult thing to do.
Well, it's always difficult to do things that are, clandestine. I mean, to sort of ban something that is operating in a clandestine fashion. And there's always going to be the retort that, as we saw with various attempts in France to ban the burqa and the niqab, that, tends to kind of reify the practice, drive it underground, give it a kind of kudos or status. There's been numerous attempts to ban, the niqab, even in nominally Muslim states as well, because it's seen as being quite a political symbol. And you'd find the same, I think, with the Sharia Council. If you come out with an outright ban or a criminalisation, then the Sharia Council takes on a kind of, sort of a holy significance, if you like. And becomes a sort of sacred cause for certain groups of people. But nonetheless, why do we have to start the conversation with saying, then the only response we can have is blind passivity?
Yeah.
I think it's really important to just state things factually and say there should be no mediation systems in this country that allow people to operate a family legal jurisdiction that is independent of English law and sometimes runs directly counter to it.
Yeah.
I think that has to be the starting point. Now, how you enforce that, well, that's for a better woman than myself to perhaps flesh out. But we do have to start with positions of moral clarity. You're either for formal sexual equality or you're not.
Yes,
you can't have it both ways.
Yes. Yeah. We did a report, or Julie Bindle did it for us actually, in 2013 about FGM.
Yeah.
And it was one of these where they were using the same, women at risk, they were using the same stats for years. And it was something like 10,000 girls were at risk of this. We thought, this is a bit low. And sure enough, we found out it was tortuous, but by doing all these FOI things, it was 168,000 at risk then. And in fact, that actually did have some success for us because the government actually did start including those stats. How much good it's done in terms of prosecutions is another thing. I think there's been one.
Yeah, there's been one, yes.
Just
they won't.
one.
No, it's not.
And it's actually been against the law since 1985, 86, I think, specifically, FGM. But you're completely right. I'm totally with you. I just obviously have to point out the hows and the whys and the wherefores. But, of course, you have to start from this position that this has got to end. We can't, the integrity of our whole kind of state and nation.
I mean, I think if you start from the principle that there is one law.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it applies to everybody equally. And once you establish that, then all else must surely flow. I mean, then you have to say, well, then religious marriages, whether you're Muslim or Jewish or whatever, they have to be registered as civil marriages, and then divorces have to be similarly processed as civil arrangements as well, so that the women particularly, but sometimes maybe the men too, can establish whatever rights they have and grievances and demands they have, for example, in respect of division of assets, properly before the same kind of jurisdictional apparatus that anybody else would be pursuing a divorce before. You can't just say, well, no, some people will just have a completely different system and we don't really know what it is or where it is or how it operates or who runs it or how it, how it may be amended or changed without parliamentary involvement at all. It's just a sort of, a kind of a mini state within a state. We cannot do that. We can't do that for any group of people. If a group of people move to a country en masse and say, for the purposes of this discussion, it is to be understood that we wish to operate as a large collective in this country with rules that don't sit well with the existing legal status quo. But you know what? You can't do anything about it because this is our law. What you are dealing with de facto is colonisation.
Yes.
That is to say the enclaves of which we've been speaking are settlements. And they are settlements with intention to grow and to grow in size as well as political power. And all of these practices, whether they are recognised within the Quranic teachings or within the Sharia legislation, or whether they are simply just customary practices, they all have one thing in common, which allows us to sort of fold them under the umbrella of British Sharia, which is strengthening the clan. Strengthening the clan. Now, you could get rid of every single English person or non-Muslim in this country tomorrow morning, and you would still have the problem, because then you have different clans within Islam that are competing for those resources and for that power. So it doesn't go away just by making Britain 100% a Muslim state subject to so-called Sharia law, because, of course, that is going to be further grounds for balkanisation along perhaps Sunni Shia lines.
Yes. Yes.
And we are seeing intimations of that in some cities.
Yes. Where can people read the report? Is there a hard copy or is it on a site somewhere?
I think there's only an electronic version at the moment, although there will be hard copies. But if you go to the Women's Policy Centre, just Google Women's Policy Centre and it'll come up and you can download the electronic report. As I say, there's much of the information in that report is probably quite well known to your viewers and listeners because it's things that the mainstream press has been documenting for some time now. What I hope to offer is allowing the clan as a framework for rethinking the Sharia question so that we can understand the urgency of the question, not only in terms of women's equality, but also in terms of British sovereignty and national security and stability.
Great. Anna, thank you so much for explaining with.
Very welcome. Thanks for having me.
It's great. Will you stay with us just for a few questions for our members, exclusive questions?
Yes.
For that. But in the meantime, thank you very, very much. A brilliant conversation there, I thought. One of my favourites, in fact. We shall see you next week. In the meantime, do have a lovely week, won't you? Bye-bye. Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.